San Francisco, California, this is What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Varca with Andy Lipson. Today, we will discuss the ongoing national prison strike across the USA that began on the 21st of August and is set to end on the 9th of September. The strike was partly a response to the April 2018 prison riot at Lee Correctional Institution, which killed 7 inmates and was the deadliest prison riot in the USA in the past 25 years.
And was in response to the poor conditions there and the wage issue as well.
Yes. And so they decided to have, they organized, and I've been listening to several other outlets on this, and one of the most interesting things for me is how they've been organizing through family, through phones that they've, like underground phones that they have, mobiles. What other? They've also been people that visit them, also activists, and they've been organizing other prisoners around. So, anything you want to add?
Well, first off, it's a prison strike, but it's no different than a strike of any set of workers. It's a strike over their working conditions and their living conditions, which happen to be the same in this case. And they've been abhorrent forever, and the United States has 4% of the U.S. population, but 25% of the prison population of the world. And we are literally in the United States in a gulag state. And people know about the level of racism, where 13% of the population is black, whereas 50% of the population in prison is black. The prison industry has ballooned to 2.3 million people. Partly this is, and there's been the privatization of prisons. Those are going to be things we're going to be talking about. But it's not just the privatization. The state-run, the publicly run prisons are gulags with 80,000 people at any one time in solitary confinement. That's virtually torture centers. I just thought this was a really important issue because I think people think of prisoner strike as something outside of the working class, but no, this is the act of the working class defending itself, and it's any workers who do not see workers in jail as part of their class are, again, it's like the issue we talk about, illegal immigration and the border, falling for the same nonsense again. Those workers in jail are just as much brothers and sisters to the struggle of workers than people across the border or people in this country who aren't in jail. I will read a quote which I like from Eugene Debs, and this I think is going to encapsulate where I'm coming from on this. He goes, "Where there is a lower class, I am in it. Where there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free." What he's saying there, this is not a moral statement of like, oh, I feel sorry for prisoners. He identifies with them. His identity politics are the politics of working class. He identifies with any worker who's struggling anywhere, in any country, in any prison, and as long as those people are in prison, he feels he's in prison because he knows that his struggle is bound up with theirs. And that was true then, and it's true today. So I think this is an important issue. One of the ways it's going to be different is we often don't use this as a way of informing you about issues as much. We assume you've got the background, but we found there was a lot of rich stuff in the demands of these workers. So we're actually going to read the individual demands. Like we're going to switch. We've each done a little bit of work looking into those demands and some of the background to it, and then we're going to kind of discuss it from there.
Yes. So with that said, we have decided to read these demands, and I will do the even ones. There are 10, and I will do the odd ones, and you will do the even ones. Yeah. Sorry about that. And so let's get right to it. The first demand that this prison strike is calling for is, I will read it, it's the immediate improvements to the conditions of prisons and prison policies that recognize the humanity of imprisoned men and women. That is very self-explanatory. The conditions of these prisons, from the prisoners have been talking a lot about how they are very dirty. They do not have adequate, sometimes, ventilation, and there's lots of infectious sicknesses that they're getting because of the overcrowding in prisons, especially at detention centers where they are overcrowding with so many immigrants now. And one of the things I keep reading about is when they're put in solitary confinement, how people have these conditions where they do not have any access to clean water and any access to even clean food, and people are not getting adequate health care or any sort of access to medical needs for themselves because of the sicknesses that abound in these prisons. And the other one is the prison policies that they're demanding that should be recognized for them are just around visitation rights. And one that was interesting to me was the policy around respecting people's religion, such as the right to meditate or the right to pray, or confiscation. They're requesting that also have respect for the confiscation of their religious reading material. And one very heartfelt article written by a family of their imprisoned loved one was to notifying families about inmate deaths vary from state to state, and some say the process is very inhumane. Many times people will get a call. I will link to in this article that I read, where this mother was she was just doing her regular shopping, and she got a call from the prison institution, and they had notified her many weeks later about her family member having already passed away. And that was very hard to know in that moment. There isn't a process. Like, there are some people that have that are notified, and like military service people that will have a process to notify when their family member has been deceased. There will be a service person going to the house, and they will have a recovery process for all of that. And that is what these prisoners are requesting, for their families to be having those grievance processes in place for them, so that they can grieve their loved ones. So this is just some of the examples of what the prison policies surrounding what they are demanding for to recognize the humanity in every imprisoned person. So that's the first one. Did you want to add anything to it?
The only thing I'll highlight is they don't just talk about men; they talk about men and women.
Yes.
For all the talk of women's rights that people think are developing around, getting better around the Me Too movement and things like that, the lack of access to abortion, and the fact that the largest growing population, for the largest group who is seeing their increase in population is among women. That's where we've seen the largest rise in women in prison population, and the ideas of, or the things that people are talking about that happen for women are them being frisked by women, but men watching, being watched in bathrooms and being watched in cells by men, obviously being touched, raped, sexually harassed by other guards. That is rape, and some of the acts that are going on in these prisons for women are considered torture, considered acts of torture by the Geneva Convention, I think it is, and that's what's happening for an increasing number of women in our prison system. So I will just say that.
I want to say, just because I also know some folks that were listening to this, that they said that they don't really have the time to go look for a link, so I will just say the link out loud right now. You can find this article that I was mentioning about on the marshallproject.org, and you can search in keywords, "Your loved one dies, the prison leaves a voicemail." And that is, I was talking about just how there's no such procedure when someone dies in prison, and it can take weeks or days to find them. And families say that some families have said that they have been notified without specific notifications about their family being deceased. So I just mentioned the link so I don't have to post it. So I'm glad.
But Are you going to do that each time?
No, that was the only
Okay.
one link I just wanted to say.
All right. Because that'll take, So number 2 is an immediate end to prison slavery. All persons imprisoned in any place of detention under United States jurisdiction must be paid the prevailing wage in their state or territory for their labor. So I suppose some people might say, oh, well, they did a crime, so they shouldn't get paid the same that anybody. That's ridiculous. The only people who benefit from workers in jail not getting paid for their work are, again, either the capitalists or the state directly. And these people are being exploited. It is wage slavery. There are states, Alabama and Arkansas, where they actually get paid nothing for the work that they do. And in all the states, they get paid as low as $4. I mean, as high as $4 an hour on average, depending on the type of job they have. If it's a job that the prison needs them to do, like serving food or cleaning the floors, they get paid generally on average about 45 cents an hour. So then, if you're not being given a job for the prison, then you might be employed by a corporation. There are 2 major corporations. What is it? Corrections Corporations of America and Walk and Hut are 2 of the major employers, and both of them, they pay a little bit more than if you get in the prison, but that is around 80 cents on average to maybe 90 cents on average. Again, these are people who you could be having people who make lingerie for Victoria's Secret, telemarketers, people who work for Chevron, all sorts of different corporate jobs that pay good money. In fact, currently, a number of prisoners in California are actually fighting the fires right now, but getting paid like less than $1 an hour when they're putting their lives on the line to essentially fight fires that were a result in many ways of corporate neglect of the planet, and that are being exacerbated by capitalism. So they're paying twice. It's an outrage what they get paid. They definitely should get paid just like anybody else. Like if they were doing the work of educating somebody, hopefully they would get paid as good as well as an educator. And that's what I believe. Another thing that is outrageous is that in addition to the fact that they get paid, only a few dollars, if not cents, if at all, when they do get that money, another part of that, like they only see half of it sometimes, because the other half of their pay that they get goes towards paying for the running of the corrections facility, sometimes for money for the people that they're trying to, as a result of some crime that they did, legal fees, things like this. So you basically put the person in a position where they are literally it's a form of indentured servitude that they're experiencing, and almost slavery going on there, and something that is only a benefit for corporate America.
I want to add to something that I just could not believe when I had heard about, not in addition to just the wage, the little bit of the just how low their wage is, that many of these people that do get the training to combat, such as the fires here in California, they are the ones, get training, and once they get that training, they leave. If they get parole and they leave the prison system, they are not able to work as firefighters. I had learned. They are not given a chance to execute, to use into practice what they had learned as what do you call it, substitute firefighters or absentee firefighters, or these people who were placed firefighters in the time of very dire need. It is very upsetting that they do not have like a second chance outside of the prison system. They are then just locked in because of their record, because of their background. They are not able to then use what they have learned and the skills that they have used to be able to use that outside of the prison system, which is very unfair, because I was just reading on one of the mothers who is working currently right now in the fires, and there has been a recent fire in Mount Shasta where they are using these prisoners. She is bound to soon get out of the prison system, but she was not going to be able to have a job after that. And so, yes, I do know that here in California, Governor Brown did try to have a legislation. I think it was Governor Brown, but it was passing through legislation, but it didn't get approved. This is detrimental to workers. They need to have skills, and they need to be able to execute those skills out in the workforce. That is part of the transition that they need to be able to recuperate themselves. And every person deserves a second chance. If you have demonstrated, not that I believe in the prison system, which is a whole other thing that we can get into, but what I'm saying is, like, if you have demonstrated sufficient enough worthy, according to this system, to be able to prove yourself as a person that can work outside and be a good person, contributor to this, a civil person, then you should be granted those opportunities. But they're taken away from you, and then you're left with struggling, and mostly people of color are the ones who are in prison. So then you have this legacy that continues, that they're not able to then support for their families. Their children then will not be able to have the resources they need for themselves, and then it's a cycle. So it's just, that is the one thing I wanted to add, just additional to the wage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Number three.
The Prison Litigation Reform Act must be rescinded, allowing imprisoned humans a proper channel to address grievances and violations of their rights. Prison Litigation Reform Act, the PLRA, it just only makes it harder for prisoners to file lawsuits in federal court. I think it was after 1996, when prisoners before that were able to file grievances for any of the things such as abuse from prison guards, or any infringing on their rights, the little rights that they have within the prison. If any of that was happening, they could then file a grievance outside of the prison institution to a court. After the Prison Litigation Reform Act was enacted, then all prisoners had to go through the process within the prison system to be able to file a grievance, whatever the system was, and it varies from state to state, and it varies from prison to prison. And we're talking about from government prisons to privately owned prisons to detention centers, the ones that have opened up, such as some people are calling them, like similar to like camps, at the border. If they even have any grievance for immigrants processes, this is only another way for people to shut up and to silence people, because I had read many cases where there were rapes from prison guards, there were abuse and torture, as well as inhumane, like taunting. How do you call, like like when they mind fuck you sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
When they we need to censor that.
Yeah, but either way.
But you know what I mean? Like, they really mess with you psychologically, and many of these grievances that were after the PLRA was enacted, many of the grievances took months, even including years, to get through, and were ignored and dismissed. Something that isn't allowed, something that doesn't give prisoners any voice to state the horrible crimes that are committed against them, because they are crimes if you're being treated inhumanely. And there are 3 parts to it, which I wanted to read very quickly, but I don't know if you wanted to say something about that. Maybe.
I guess the only thing I'll add is you're going to hear a lot about how things got a lot worse for prisoners in the 90s. And that's because that was Bill Clinton's tenure.
Yes.
That was part of the what was the Violent Crime and Law Enforcement Act done in 1994, and then there was subsequent laws later, that's where you got the 3 strike laws. That's where you got an increased restriction on paroles, which I'll talk about in a subsequent in the next number 4, and what you're talking about, Eduardo. So the 90s were an awful time for black people and brown people. It was an awful time for workers. it was also, in addition to the growth between the wealthiest in this country and the poorest in this country, that's when it grew the most, was in the 90s. You also saw an explosion of our prison population with laws enacted by the Democratic Party and Bill Clinton.
And I just want to quickly, I'm also going to link something on this Prison Litigation Reform Act, but I just want to read that there are only four parts to it.
Okay.
All right. The parts that are most important for anyone is just that there's exhaustion of administrative remedies. You have to go through you have to exhaust all the processes that exist within the institution itself before you are able to ask for a court to intervene for anyone else outside of the institution to go through. That is one part to it. And if you don't exhaust the grievance process, then your case will not be heard and any court will just dismiss it. Then there are the filing fees, which, how do you have the money for this if you're a prisoner and if you don't have any? Yes, and if you don't even have any job within the institution. So this is that all prisoners must pay court filing fees in full. And if you do not have the money up front, you can pay the filing fee over time through monthly installments from your prison commissary account, but the filing fee will not be waived. This is just another roadblock that just did not allow it. Then the third part with the three strikes provision, the third key thing to remember about the PLRA is that each lawsuit or appeal you file that is dismissed because a judge decides that it is frivolous, malicious, or does not state a proper claim counts as a strike. After you get three strikes, you cannot file another lawsuit. That is, you cannot file unless you pay the entire court filing fee upfront, and if it's validated at all, your grievance. Then the other thing too is the physical injury requirement, proof of physical injury requirement. If you're filing a grievance and you have bruises that some prison guard gave to you, and over time, months and years pass by for this grievance process to go within your institution, those bruises are just going to be, off the record because they go off. And you cannot file a lawsuit for mental or emotional injury unless you can also show physical injury to it. So these are the four parts to it. I will link something more exhaustive that you can look at, but this is widely recognized as just another way to silence prisoners. And I was listening to prisoners discuss this particular thing. They didn't know that it was a PLRA act, but they were discussing how many prisoners just give up, that they don't even if something happens to them, they just complacent. They realize that they're not going to be heard. Mm-hmm. So I will post a link for this as well.
Mm-hmm. Number 4.
Yeah.
This number 4 was the Truth in Sentencing Act and the Sentencing Reform Act must be rescinded so that imprisoned humans have the possibility of rehabilitation and parole. No human shall be sentenced to death by incarceration or serve any sentence without the possibility of parole. Again, I completely agree with this. Truth in Sentencing Act was passed in the 80s. Sentencing Reform Act was passed in the 90s under Bill Clinton. The one in the 80s was 84. And both of them are, people have always said, they go to prison, they get 10 years, but then they're out in 3, Mm-hmm. So the Truth in Sentencing Act and the Sentence Reform Act were basically to say, if we give you 10 years, then particularly if certain crimes, you're not getting out any earlier than 8 years, 85%. Other crimes, were restricted. You could get a little like 50% or something like that if it wasn't considered a violent crime. One of the reasons why the U.S. is a gulag country and has the largest prisons of any country in the world, including North Korea, including China, is that it doesn't just charge a lot of people with crimes. Over 10 million people per year go through our prison system and jail system per year. Do that, and over, I think, 7 million people are in some form of either being in prison, on parole, or on probation in this country. It's the length of the sentences that actually makes our prison population makes it so that we have so many people in prison. It's because we sentence them for so long. So these laws were, again, more part of the Republican and Democratic get tough on crime laws to basically make it so that people couldn't get parole as quickly. And again, it all comes down to this notion that these are irredeemable people. They've done horrible things. That's the way they want to talk about people who are in prisons, and to demonize them and to say that they can't be rehabilitated. They don't try to rehabilitate them. They give them work, but don't let them do the work once they get out of here. They don't give them any money so they can actually get out of prison, or they can have a life outside of prison once they're there. So this is just all part of that and has to go away. The one I want to talk about also is the idea of life without possibility of parole. I don't agree with that either. I don't think there's any certain person who is not able to find some way, at least there's a possibility of that person recovering. I don't believe in the possibility of the fact that people can't recover in some way, shape, or form, no matter what they've done. Obviously, there's resources you need to have for people so that they can be safe for themselves and everyone else. But just like I don't believe in the death penalty, I don't believe death by prison as well. And so I very much agree with the idea that the life without the possibility of parole is not, well, we both don't agree with prisons. We don't in the first place, but I don't agree with that sentence.
Mm-hmm. Number 5, an immediate end to the racial overcharging, oversentencing, and parole denials of black and brown humans. Black humans shall no longer be denied parole because the victim of the crime was white, which is a particular problem in southern states. I'm going to just list out some statistics because we have to go by facts. While people of color make up about 30% of the United States population, they account for 60% of those imprisoned. The prison population grew by 700% from the 1970, which we were talking about in the 90s after that, right, to 2005. So this is during this period. A rate that is outpacing crime and population rates. The incarceration rates disproportionately impact men of color. 1 in every 15 African American men and 1 in every 36 Hispanic men are incarcerated in comparison to 1 in every 106 white men. This is just some few statistics. You can go online and search numerous statistics on this. There is the black population that exists in the USA is very low, and they are the most imprisoned people in the USA. What could be, I mean, if you look at it, many people attribute it to, oh, well, I've heard some people say this, even liberals. Well, African American communities are very broken, and they're not taking up responsibility, and they continue having not being owning up or not being responsible for their crimes. African prison population, prisons were inhabited by mostly white people. Most African Americans were enslaved when prisons were opened here in the USA, and white people were the ones who populated the prison population. After slavery ended and Jim Crow laws, the population of African Americans in prisons grew. This is one other way that if you could not put a Jim Crow law in act, you found other ways to get around it to be able to incarcerate and enslave African Americans. And is it systemic racism at the institutional level? Yes, it is. There are studies that show that a white person and a black person committing the same crime have been given, African Americans getting the harsher sentence than a white person. As well as most of the crimes are petty crimes, such as, well, now it's very hard to even understand that this is happening, but marijuana, right? That used to have, they used to be, if you owned some ounces of marijuana, then you would all of a sudden have to go straight to be incarcerated. And now everyone is legalizing it. I say that everyone now that has been incarcerated because of marijuana should get out because of the legalization. Once the legalization happened in California, I don't know why people are still incarcerated for something that they did many years ago when it was attached to this marijuana issue.
Grandfathered into jail.
And it's just, that's one of them. The other thing that I think that I was really, I don't know if I have it here, but one of the things that I felt very emotional about just reading is that how African American youth are teenagers, adolescents are viewed less innocent by judges than white teenagers, and this has been studied by an association of psychologists organization, where they have seen that judges gave harsher sentences to African American adolescents than white adolescents, because we tend to think that they are less innocent, and those prejudices are labeled on them. And I will read one other one. According to the recent data by the Department of Education, African American students are arrested far more often than their white classmates. The data shows that 96,000 students were arrested and 242,000 referred to law enforcement by schools during the 2009-2010 school year. This is very recent. This is not like years ago. Of the students, Black and Hispanic students made up more than 70% of arrested or referred students. Harsh school punishments, from suspensions to arrest, have led to high numbers of youth of color coming into contact with the juvenile justice system at an earlier age. Andy, you work at a high school with a very high population of Latino and African American students. I have worked in also an elementary school with a higher number of 90% of the student population were Latino, and we had African Americans as well. There has been numerous studies that show that even teachers, and I will admit that this sometimes happens within our society because of African American students and Latino students are normally tagged and already labeled as students that are going to be malicious or bad. And this is part of also the prison pipeline that we can discuss in another video.
School to prison pipeline.
The school to prison pipeline, thank you. Where I have seen this happen, where teachers tend to be more prejudiced towards African American students. I have worked in 4 different elementary schools. Some as a sub and other ones as my regular time, and the one of the common discussions that we have is, should we suspend our African American students, and what kind of alternatives can we give, such as restorative justice conversations with our students. I don't know if you want to mention any of that, anything within the school system, because we have both seen it happened. And this is also the school to prison pipeline. This is why we're also seeing this, what they are demanding, that there shouldn't be an overcharge of oversentencing and pro-denials of Black and brown humans. Do you want to say anything about that?
I mean, yes, I would say that overwhelmingly Black and brown students are suspended and have detentions and things like that more than white students. And those outcomes, and because of that, there has been attempts to talk about alternative methods of dealing with this, where you bring the parties together and have them, like if there's something wrong, you bring the parties together and you deal with it like a family, not like a prison. Those things are not funded, though. They say it, and so what schools are doing is attempting to try to lower these numbers of suspensions without actually providing the actual resources to do the kind of work you'd actually need to do. And it is actually creating tensions in schools. I actually feel it. I feel the pressure I need something to be able to help me control my classroom.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to give me the real restorative justice, then all you have is something like, I got to get this student out, I got to get that, and time to cool off. And it is a problem. This is a problem of capitalism. This is a problem of capitalist schools, capitalist prisons, of a capitalist system that leads us to this.
I will say, though, that part of the issue that we have in our schools, just a quick note to that, is that the lack of resources. If we had more personnel to deal with our families, with our families that need support, because many of the students that do come from single-parent homes or divided households or broken families, they should have extra support, and our schools do not have those resources.
Yes.
And there should also have a transformation of how the school system is set up so that our students can succeed. I think that we can make another video about this another time, but there are issues within the school system that contribute to this, and it's not just about lowering suspensions for African Americans. It's a whole paradigm shift that we have to have around our schools.
Yeah, of course.
That allow teachers to be able to teach and personnel to be there as support to be dealing with the issues that occur and the violence that exists within communities.
there needs to be a revolutionary change to all our institutions. Yes. One thing I'll add to this is to this issue of the number 5 essentially. Is that the people are heard about the privatization of prisons, and it is a problem. It is a problem that only about 9%, about 9% or 10% of the people who are imprisoned in this country are imprisoned in a private institution versus a publicly run institution, although both institutions have problems. But the one group that finds itself the one group that finds itself where it's 50% of them are in the private sector or in private prisons are immigrants. And those groups, that is one of the one of the larger growing prison populations is illegal immigrants. Once again, finding themselves doubly exploited once they get their job here by a regular employer who will use them, or if they're sent into a prison, exploited there. And there's big money for the prison industry to put these people to find new detention centers, particularly among immigrants who are younger, juvenile immigrants. Mm-hmm. So this is also an explosion that we have to stop. So number 6, an immediate end to racist gang enhancement laws targeting black and brown humans. Now this is one I didn't actually know about. The gang enhancement basically means that if the crime that you were being accused of committing and you're being charged and then put in jail for committing is one where it's somehow connected to gang activity, that you're in a gang and you do it, or while you were selling drugs, while you were caught with possessing a weapon. If you beat somebody up and you happen to be in a gang, then basically you get additional 3 to 7 to 15 years added on depending on the severity of the crime. So you get charged with the crime as a regular person would be charged, plus gang enhancement. That is additional years that go on it because it's associated with the gang. So that's not just true, and it's not just true for people who are gang members. And again, this is totally racist because a lot of the people who find themselves in gangs happen to be black, happen to be brown, and it's again part of that whole. We're going to deal with gangs by getting tough on crime, but it also affects the families. If you are a girlfriend or boyfriend of somebody and you're not in a gang, but you do something that helps them while they do their criminal activity, you then get charged with gang enhancement. If you are a parent and you don't do something about your kid who's in a gang, you can get charged with additional crimes by virtue of gang enhancement. This is where parents are being charged either fines and even up to going into prison, most of it being fines, for the gang activity of their children. So these laws are wholly racist, wholly unfair, and don't do anything to actually deal with gang violence, which is actually, again, a social problem, a jobs issue, a racism issue, a poverty issue. And, it's like the biggest, most violent gang is in the White House and in Congress, honestly. That's the gang that needs to be dealt with, and in these corporate boardrooms. So you want to deal with a gang, and you want to talk about a set of people who have no recidivism, or in terms of every time they do their crime, they just do it again and again and again. There's no recovery from these people. You're talking about the people who run this country and the people and the corporations who benefit from it. So that's, I guess, what I'll say about gang enhancement.
And I will say, gangs are not an invention of people of color. I think people tag gangs, pandillas, crimes to people of color. Crimes and gangs do not belong to people of color. They are part of a phenomena that exists in many cultures and in many countries, white, brown, yellow, everyone. It just is not something that, African Americans and Latinos are known for their gangs. One of the most biggest gangs was in Nazi Germany, and there are gangs that exist in the Congo that recruit women to enslave them for sex slavery, for children that arm. You want to go, maybe people can go into distinction what is like an army and what is a gang, but gangs do not exist just within people of color. Gangs exist everywhere. So it's just this other thing I just wanted to add was just that people like to tag this word gang. When Trump talks to and uses a rhetoric about gangs and why immigrants, he normally tags gangs and immigrants and people of color to it, and that is not so. Gangs just want to, maybe people, if you know about that already, good for you, but a lot of people just tend to associate words because of our language and the rhetoric that persists in the mainstream to certain groups of people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things they did in creating these gang enhancement laws is they basically defined a gang as 3 or more people. That was the number. So one of the problems is if a prosecutor accuses you of being in a gang, you can still get the gang enhancement unless you can convince them that you're not in a gang. And so this is the association of gangs with people of color, which is again racist and a stereotype.
Yeah.
Because I would again say Wall Street is a gang. The Wells Fargo is a gang, but no one deals with them. No one deals with their racketeering. No one deals with their lawlessness. But nevertheless, the pinning to a person of being in a gang is there's no science to it. It's just you either get called that or not, and it's very, what's that called when it's arbitrary, very arbitrary. In fact, somebody we both know, when she got involved in the criminal justice system, and they were accusing her of something, they wanted to pin her act to some sort of gang thing, if you remember, and they tried to charge her more with that by saying it wasn't just a fight. We think, and it happens to be because she's brown. We think it might have been related to gang activity, and that could have actually,
had more
repercussions.
Yeah, thank you. Number 7. No imprisoned human shall be denied access to rehabilitation programs at their place of detention because of their label as a violent offender. Part of the reason why I am a prison abolitionist, I do not agree with the system that we have in place for people that commit crime, whatever crime it is. Part of the reason is because at the heart of every crime, there is something more profound that exists that drove this person to do something. A lot of people will say that criminals are criminals and they're responsible. As human beings, one of the number one issues that we have, and we discussed this also for our gun control video, mental health is an issue that exists in our society. We need to take mental health more seriously. And rehabilitation programs for offenders and for repeated offenders are, and my belief, is the way to go to be able to support people. I know people that have been in prison, and I know other people that are still in prison that if they only got the supports they need. I know someone that was very close to me and that was schizophrenic, that did something and had schizophrenic diagnosis prior to being imprisoned and did something horrible. It was burning a house.
Oh, arson?
Arson, yeah, or burning a house. What kind of crime is that? Misdemeanor? That's not misdemeanor. That's a high
felony.
crime. Yeah, that's a felony crime. But this person had suicidal tendencies and needed medication and needed rehabilitation programs. And what this person needed was not to be imprisoned and to be in a place with unstable energy, unstable people, with people from different backgrounds. What this person needed was a different sort of system in place for recuperating and for and I don't know exactly what that will look like if they would be released or not into society. That is not what we're discussing today. But what I will say is that the majority of people that are in prisons, there are many people in prison that have trauma, many people that have been scanned, and studies have shown where their levels, their brains are smaller than most of the average person, and their cognitive abilities are sometimes heightened because of strategic ways to be able to get to do things within prison systems, but their emotional part has been suppressed from years and from the background that they had received. And that is what I think needs to happen is we need to tackle the roots of the problem in our society to deal with our foster care system, to deal with our single family homes, to deal with the necessary social supports that are needed within schools, and the shift in paradigm within the school systems. Those are the root causes for our children and for our future adults not to have these things happen where they are then committing crime because of survival needs or this capitalist system pressure for material things, and that means money, and even survival fits within that. So the rehabilitation program is another part to supporting people in prison systems, but also alongside of that, the flip of the coin of that is also is going into the root of the problem of these issues with people in our society and mental health issue. So maybe I'm rambling a little bit and you can edit all this, but the rehabilitation programs in place are needed at detention facilities. I think I'll stop there, Andy. If you want to add anything to it. I kind of digressed.
I don't think I'll add anything other than I'll actually just go to the next one because I actually think these are connected, and any person can be rehabilitated, and the irony is that the people who most need rehabilitation, the presidents of this country, George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, who've killed millions, and all of them, those people are not only are not in jail, there's no process of rehabilitating them. But mine is number 8, which is connected to number 7. State prisons must be funded specifically to offer more rehabilitation services.
So that is in general.
Yes.
And this one was as a violent
violent offenders. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And so I'll say 2 things that I heard. One is that the person who's from the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee had basically pointed out that the most successful rehabilitation programs were ones that were actually prisoner-run and prisoner-led and prisoner-introduced, and those are the ones that get the least funding. Often they're crowded out by state-run programs that they want to impose, and he also talked about some of these NGOs coming in and having their own idea about what they wanted to do. And I just think it's very interesting that and telling that the things that work best are done by the prisoners themselves. And those are the ones that are first on the chopping block or the least funded. But I'll actually just read this quote that I found from this professor of psychology and also a law professor at NYU. His name is James Gilligan. He wrote an article in the New York Times about punishment versus rehabilitation, and he wrote this: "It would be beneficial to every man, woman, and child in America, and harmful to no one if we were to demolish every prison in this country and replace them with locked, safe, and secure home-like residential communities, what we might call an anti-prison. Such a community would be devoted to providing every form of therapy its residents needed: substance abuse treatment, psychotherapy, medical and dental care, and every form of education for which the residents were motivated and capable, from elementary school to college and graduate school. Getting a college degree while in this anti-prison is the only program that has, getting a college degree while in prison is the only program that has ever been shown to be 100% effective for years or decades at a time in preventing recidivism. Prisoners should be treated with exactly the same degree of respect and kindness as we would hope they would show to others that after they return to the community. As I said, people learn by example."
Yes.
So I completely agree with that.
One other thing I wanted to add to this rehabilitation process: sometimes it may not look medical, sometimes it might look like a spiritual rehabilitation. I will post a link on YouTube and our podcast just in the documentary of Vipassana, which is meditation, a form of meditation, a Buddhist form of meditation, where it has been introduced in some prisons in India and has been introduced here in the USA and even in southern states. And here in California, they're trying in San Quentin, up north, I think it is, here in up north of San Francisco, where it's prison-led, prisoners-led, inmate-led, maybe it's the correct form. and and it, and and it has transformed lives, and this has shown a decrease in violence within the prison within the prison, and has even strengthened relationships and changed relationships between prisoner guard and prisoners, because they're both invited to do this meditation process. So it's a different form of discipline or alternative. You're then given an option to try this out for a transformation within yourself and within your community within the prison system. So that's another form. Right.
But our prison system is a torture center. Our prison system is a punishment center, and it's made to essentially punish workers who didn't know better, but to try to essentially get money for themselves, because either they don't have access to money in any way, they don't have jobs, and unless, well, I'll just leave it at that.
All right. 9. Pell Grants must be reinstated in all U.S. states and territories. My assumption to this demand is that Pell Grants must be reinstated as part of their transitory period, and even after short or long-term period after they get released. This is not my understanding, that it wasn't within the prison system.
While you're incarcerated, it might be either on parole or probation.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Okay. So so what are these Pell Grants? They're subsidies, right? The grants help low-income students pay for higher education, were available for prisoners until 1994, when Congress banned inmates from the program.
There you go, Bill Clinton. Thank you.
So, and this is a Democrat. So Congress hasn't changed its mind, but at the urging of advocates like Nixon, okay, for Republicans, the Department of Education under former President Barack Obama greenlit a pilot program in 2015 that extended Pell Grants to thousands of inmates. But every year, the department must decide whether to continue the pilot, making its fate uncertain. Trump has decided to not continue it. So, but what I will say is that, how do you expect a prisoner, after they get out of prison, to be able to find themselves a job when most jobs require a background check, to be able to pay for their shelter, for them to be able to pay for their education so that they could advance, whether they choose to have a career or whether they choose to have a vocational career, and to pay for, if they have children, their children's expenses, and to pay for their medical and alimentación, their food expenses. So Pell Grants are one form in the transition phase that is required for them, to be able to transition out. You have been locked up for what? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, 30 years. And you have lived one certain life in one way. Your brain has learned routine in one specific way under lots of violence and oppression and lots of hostility. And you come outside trying to seek, if you even have the courage to go seek out for a job and to apply for it, then be scanned for your background check and to be denied, not having the social skills with so many people of diverse backgrounds in an interview, wanting to go to school, learning the system of going back to school, because we have a one-way system, a very linear way of system of working within schools, and still being able to provide for your family or for yourself, for all the things I just already mentioned, without having any support. Pell Grants are an essential part of that transition. And Pell Grants, I agree, should be reinstated and shouldn't be a program that should be looked at every year to see if the department must decide whether to continue the pilot or not. That was done under President Barack Obama. It should be a permanent thing that every inmate or ex-inmate should have as part of their transitory phase. And everyone really should have it. So I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is what I found out is that convicts or people who've been in prison are often ineligible for welfare, student loans, public housing, and food stamps. So essentially, you're given you get exploited for your work. That if you do it there, you come out of there with no money. They don't give you any access to anything that allows you to advance yourself. And they wonder why they call this thing a revolving door, why there's this recidivism or people returning to the jail. It's remarkable that it's not 100% returning to the jail, given the fact that it's remarkable that many people are able to stay out of it, given the fact that they're put in these torture centers and then given nothing when they come out of it. And again, like, I think what it shows is the fact that people are able to stay out of jail when they're put in this system is remarkable to me. The ones who can't seem to stop their crimes no matter what are the rich in this country and the political class, the capitalist class, again, time and time again, making war, destroying the environment, all sorts of criminality in Wall Street. So those people have a 100% return rate to their crimes, but never get tried on them, and have all the things going for them. So to me, again, the comparison is stark between the conditions for workers here versus the conditions and the benefits given to the capitalists.
Yeah. I have nothing else to add to what I already had said. Yeah.
Number 10, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
The voting rights of all confined citizens serving prison sentences, pretrial detainees, and so-called ex-felons must be counted. Representation is demanded. All voices counted. Again, you've heard different states have different degrees to which you lose the right to vote. Some there are two states actually, Maine and I think Delaware. I think it's Maine and Delaware, where you actually, if you're in prison, you can vote. So it's not a crazy thing to actually have people in prison voting. They should be allowed to vote. They're citizens, and they have rights. They should have rights, and the right to vote is one of those things. And in most other states, it's like you lose the right to vote. Certainly, you don't get the right to vote while you're incarcerated. Maybe you get it when you're on parole, or maybe after your probation period. And then in some states, you don't get it at all until much later, unless you apply for something to try to get those rights back. So again, this is just another way in which prisoners are being treated like less than human. This is another part of the aspect of the inhumanity of it, of the racism of it. And we know, like in places like Florida during the 1980 election, Bush's election with Gore and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That was in 2000, where a number of people in Florida, couldn't vote. People couldn't vote. Yeah. Black people couldn't vote, because they were, felons. So this has to go. But it's interesting. I didn't know this, that two states actually. So to think this is not some sort of radical demand. There are already two states that actually allow people who are in prison to vote while you're in prison and once you get out.
Mm-hmm. I will link Democracy Now! Interview of a woman that I think it was in Texas, where she went to go vote, and she was an ex-prisoner, and she just was doing her civil duty of going to go vote, but because there is this restriction for people who are ex-felons or ex-prisoners, you're not allowed to vote. They strip away your civil duty to participate in a process that everyone should be participating in. I think everyone has an opinion. Everyone has their position to state. That is what a democratic system looks like, and I will link to it. And she then is being prosecuted for it because they want to make an example of her for all other people who are ex-prisoners not to do. Why? Well, because the majority of prisoners are people of color in this country, and they tend to lean towards a left wing
point of view.
Point of view. Thank you, Andy. Getting tired. And so the Republicans or the right wing politicians are afraid that if they vote, they'll be overwhelmed by too many of these votes. There shouldn't be any vote IDs for voting. There shouldn't be. We should have what Switzerland has. Everyone gets a ballot mailed to them, and everyone votes. Mm-hmm. And they have multiple parties as well, not just two systems. This binary system. So that's all I will say. I will add to that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we got to all 10 demands. Mm-hmm. I think, honestly, because I am sort of a pessimist, as I have said many times on these episodes, I do not think these demands will be met. Sadly. Why? Because it is a threat. It is a threat to the establishment. Mm-hmm. It is a threat to the current administration. It is like I said, it's beyond this current administration. It is a threat to the institutions that hold these prisoners, to the capitalists that make money off these these private prisons. And that is the sad part about this, because I state things as how they are. What I do think that these demands will hold is they will make way for a conversation and dialogue such as we are having now. Thanks to the prison strike, we are having this conversation. And, this conversation should be had, not some riot that is sparking the conversation. This is an ongoing conversation. Why does it need to take a riot? The 9th of September commemorates the Attica gracias, uprising that happened in
1971.
Okay, we will put
I think it's 71.
The year. Yeah, it happened in the 70s for sure.
Yeah.
And these two dates are very symbolic, because, and this is what the 3-week strike was given
August 21st was the execution of George Jackson and killed in San Quentin prison, as well as also the date of the Nat Turner slave rebellion that started hundreds of years ago.
And whether these demands are met or not, it is the symbolic significance. It has an impact on our conversation in the mainstream news. Some of it is being covered, but certainly in all the alternative news that I listen to, it is being covered, and they should be honored. Will it be honored? I do not think so, Andy. My personal take on it. I do not think that.
I agree with you that I agree with everything you said about whether or not they're going to give in and who is threatened by this most. It's a challenge most and foremost to the capitalists, because they completely benefit from this. I might actually show these graphs on here.
You should, Andy.
Okay, because I'm going to show two graphs basically, and I'm going to describe them. They're going to be on here. If you look at the graph that shows the wealth of the bottom 50% falling down, and the wealth of the top 1% going up, right? That falling down and going up started in the early 70s. All right, and it really got picked up in the 80s and picked up in the 90s. All right, that's exactly the same thing you will see here. All right, if you look at this incarceration rate, you will see that the year it really picks up is the beginning of the 70s, and then it gets faster in the 80s and then really escalates. And the rise of our prison population is directly attributable to the loss in wealth of the bottom 50% in this country, as well as the rise of the wealth of the 1% in this country. It is only one of the things that's correlated, as well as lower unionization rate, all sorts of things. But our prison population is a symptom of the and in fact the wealth, the rich have gotten rich not just by immiserating workers, but throwing a whole group of them into prisons and exploiting them there. And so what they're doing is a threat to them in exposing the inhumanity of that prison system, which is basically hurting us workers. And I agree with you that their strike alone is unlikely to do this. Now, the things they are doing is, from what I understand, that there are some sit-ins that are taking place where they're refusing to move from locations. They're refusing to
go to work.
Yeah, to go to work in some cases, right? Yeah, and they're also refusing to buy certain things. They're doing boycotts and things like that. And those actions are meaningful.
Hunger strike.
Yeah, hunger strikes are meaningful and are kind of like shouts. It's kind of like our YouTube channel. It's a shout from the wilderness looking for an audience. I think in many ways the actions that these workers are taking, I guess that they are workers, is really a challenge to us, because when would my union strike in solidarity with the workers who if they were going on a strike in the prison? They should, and it's that sort of consciousness we're going to have to build within the working class, where my union and teachers unions or transportation workers unions actually go on strike when workers in prisons go on strike, and we do that in solidarity. Just like we talked about, we have to cross border have to have cross-border solidarity, where our unions would actually act in conjunction with teachers in Oaxaca or teachers in Brazil or anywhere else. We need to have prison solidarity if we're going to actually be free, because none of these groups alone are capable of liberating ourselves. We need all of us together to do this. So I really do agree with you that their actions alone won't be enough, even if the strike got picked up, or even if it grew up within the prisons. I actually do believe that the uprising that happened in Attica, and even the one that happened in the Lee Correctional Facility, are important indications of things that are wrong. And the people who are to be blamed for that are the people who run the prison system and the people who benefit from the prison system, not the people who actually do the uprising. So I'm for those uprisings. It's just that ultimately we won't have uprisings that actually correct the system, that actually get rid of abolish prisons and really deal with these grievances, unless we have an uprising of the entire working class. That's, I guess, how I'd put it. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And like I had said earlier, I am a prison abolitionist. I do not think that prisons are the solution, nor they're not the answer to what is happening in our society. We need to look for alternative forms, and we need to get this mindset of what a crime and criminals are in our society. And that is a very challenging thing, even for myself. And I know that, like, just our prejudices around it, and the way that we frame people and this system that is so ingrained into our psyche, because we live in our everyday life, and we tend to group things and categorize people as they do criminal activities, or they should be imprisoned, or they shouldn't, and we'll discuss the death penalty on another video, because that is a separate video. But this whole mindset of criminals, we really have to get that away from the way that we think about it. There are societies that were able to discipline people that did do something against what the common consensual agreement was around a tribal system, or within a society that didn't even include prisons. And I just think that when I look at all the people that have been hurt by it, and especially children, which hurts me a lot, because I know many families, and I worked in an elementary school. You work with older kids, but I've seen this really hurt children with incarcerated parents, and in for petty crime. It really, really is not a system that it leaves a legacy, and especially within the group, like I had said already, the people of color communities. And it's one that we have to really look for outside. Angela Davis talks about it in a very short book that I recommend for everyone to read, and I'll post some links about that as well. I think we'll both have links for it, a lot of links for this one with the as well.
So thank you to the IWOC Incarcerated Workers Organization Committee for doing this. I think the other group that I heard was involved in this was the
Workers...
Lawyers?
No. Oh, well, that was another organization.
It's the Prison Lawyers Group or something like that.
Yeah.
Prisoners Lawyers Group, something like that. So I'm very glad that they got the word out about this, so that we could do this. Because I actually learned a lot from reading this stuff.
I did as well. And I think that prisoners are just a sort of like an ignored part of our population,
right? Because
we just kind of justify it with criminals.
Right. And what they are workers in cages. Yeah. So next episode, you have an idea, and I might have an idea, and we'll see what we do.
So it's good to have many ideas, because sometimes we have like, oh shoot, what should we do for the next video? I think tomorrow is Saturday, the 8th of September. Tomorrow is a climate change march here in San Francisco and throughout California. This will be a very frenzy week about many climate change summits here, because of Governor Jerry Brown has decided. Jerry Brown, right? Jerry, don't edit that one. Jerry, you see, Governor Jerry Brown has decided that because the Trump administration has stepped out of the climate change summit,
Paris Accords.
The Paris Accords, that he would take the lead here. The governor of California would take the lead in it, and they are deciding to do a summit here. So there'll be a lot of media coverage here. But tomorrow is a march where socialists, progressives, liberals, even Republicans that will show up, because there are some, or just as counter protesters. But whatever. The thing is, tomorrow will be a very eventful day, and I will be there at 11 o'clock at the Embarcadero Plaza. And I think this video will be too late to be there, but the point is that we could possibly have a conversation as a topic for the following week, and I can show maybe some little bit of footage of what happened and some of the conversations I had with people. But that is a topic that we can discuss as it relates to capitalism and climate change in general as a science, because it is something that is being denied and thought of as a Chinese hoax.
I would say that one we could do, but my preference for next week would be either to talk about the Kavanaugh hearings, or this whole thing of the New York Times op-ed, resistance, deep state stuff that's happened with Trump. I think there's a lot of rich things, kind of maybe even combining both a little bit, to talk about what the heck is going on with our system.
All right.
So that's the one I lean towards.
Well, please vote for my topic.
All right. So
one other thing, if I may be a little bit selfish.
Go ahead.
If I may be a little bit selfish.
It's your YouTube channel. You got 50% of this thing, man.
I will create a separate YouTube channel on personal YouTube channel where I will discuss not just politics, because I think I put my energy here for politics, but on arts, books that I have read, and other things such as personal things as it relates to Mexico, my country, and my growing up and my religion, as I have mentioned, as a Jehovah's Witness growing up. Just sort of an artful experience, and maybe some skits in there as well. But the reason why I mentioned this is because there was a museum, a national museum in Brazil, that was burned and that needs support. So I will link a little donation link there, because I believe that museums are very important monuments that hold a lot of our historical treasures. All right, that's it. So now we can end. Please, thank you, Andy, for allowing me to be a little bit selfish and for going over time.
Yeah.
Okay, so please like and subscribe. Most importantly, share with all. We would appreciate if you do have a review. I did read that reviews are very important.
We had 2 reviews on iTunes.
Yes.
We really like them. Thank you. So, I mean, and even if you don't like our show, you could write something on there, I suppose, what the heck.
And for my friends, you better write a review. Okay. That makes a lot of you Facebook friends.
And we said all notify, all that kind of stuff. You already said that.
I didn't say the notify.
Okay. So if you liked this video, then do like and notify and the bell, and
especially on YouTube and podcast
yes.
iTunes.
And I still would hope for more comments from people, because we don't get many comments. But maybe people are just like, oh, you guys are great. We agree with everything you say.
Well, I think as we build up our audience, I think people will. Let's enjoy this.
Anonymity.
Yes. For now.
All right.
Gracias.
That's everything?
Yes, that's
all right. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Ciao.